A Parisian Night. A 60-minute sleep story for adults. Part 1. The Walk Home. The last light of autumn was fading over Paris as Clara stepped out of the publishing house on Rue de Rivoli. She paused for a moment on the stone steps, pulling her wool coat tighter around her shoulders, and simply looked. The sky above the rooftops had turned the color of ripe apricots, bleeding into soft violet where it met the chimneys and zinc rooftops that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, the Eiffel Tower was beginning to glow, its iron lattice catching the first golden lights of evening. She still couldn't quite believe she was here. 2 years ago, she had been sitting in a cramped apartment in her hometown, editing manuscripts for a small regional press, dreaming of this exact moment. She had pinned a photograph of Paris above her desk, a view of the Seine at twilight, the bridges lit like strings of pearls, and every morning she would look at it while drinking her coffee, imagining herself walking those cobblestone streets. Now she was. Clara began her walk home, her feet finding the familiar rhythm of the route she had come to know so well over the past 8 months. Left onto Rue Saint-Honoré, past the patisserie with the pale green awning, where the owner always set out fresh madeleines at this hour, their buttery fragrance drifting onto the sidewalk like a gentle invitation. She didn't stop tonight. She was tired, pleasantly tired, the kind of weariness that comes from a day well spent. She had finished editing a beautiful novel about a woman who tended a garden in Provence, and the words still lingered in her mind like the memory of lavender. The streets were busy with the early evening rush. Office workers hurried past with briefcases and scarves fluttering behind them. A woman walked 3 small dogs on braided leashes, their tiny paws clicking against the pavement like soft rain. A man on a bicycle glided by, a baguette tucked under his arm like a precious cargo. Clara loved these small details of Parisian life. She loved how the city revealed itself in layers, each day showing her something new. The way the light fell differently on the limestone buildings depending on the season. The particular sound of café chairs being stacked at closing time. The smell of roasting chestnuts that would soon appear on street corners as autumn deepened into winter. She crossed the Pont des Arts, her favorite bridge, and paused in the middle as she always did. The Seine flowed dark and slow beneath her, reflecting the lights that were beginning to flicker on along the banks. A barge glided past, its windows warm with yellow light, and she imagined the people inside, perhaps a family sitting down to dinner, or a couple reading books in comfortable silence. The air was changing. She could feel it. There was a crispness now, a sharpness that hadn't been there even a week ago. The summers in Paris had been languid and golden, the evenings stretching on forever, but now the darkness came earlier and carried with it the first whispers of winter. She didn't mind. She had always loved autumn. There was something comforting about the way the world began to slow down, to turn inward, to prepare for the quiet months ahead. Part 2. Home. Clara's apartment was on the 5th floor of an old building in the Marais, up a narrow staircase that creaked in all the same places every time she climbed it. Her landlady, Madame Beaumont, lived on the ground floor and always left her door slightly ajar in the evenings, the blue glow of her television flickering through the gap, the soft murmur of French news anchors drifting into the hallway. The building was old, built sometime in the early 1800s, Madame Beaumont had told her proudly, and it showed its age in beautiful ways. The iron railings on the staircase had been worn smooth by generations of hands. The wooden steps dipped slightly in the middle from a century of footsteps. The walls were thick enough to keep out the noise of the city, creating a pocket of peace in the heart of Paris. Clara unlocked her door and stepped inside, immediately feeling the particular comfort of coming home. Her apartment was small, just one room that served as bedroom and living space, with a tiny kitchen tucked into an alcove and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, but she had made it hers. She set her bag down by the door and slipped off her shoes, sighing at the relief of feeling the soft wool rug beneath her tired feet. The floorboards were cold tonight. She would need to find her thick socks soon. The apartment was already growing dim as the last of the daylight faded outside her window, so she switched on the small lamp beside her bed. Just one lamp, just enough light to see by. She liked her evenings soft and quiet, like the way shadows gathered in the corners and made the room feel intimate and enclosed. She moved to the window and opened it just a crack, just enough to let in a whisper of the evening air. The sound of the city drifted up to her, distant traffic, the occasional horn, someone laughing on the street below, but it was muffled and gentle, like a lullaby sung in another room. And there was the smell. The smell of autumn in Paris was something she hadn't expected, something no one had ever described to her before she arrived. It was different from autumn back home. Here, it was a mixture of things, the slightly dusty scent of old stone cooling in the evening air, the faint sweetness of fallen leaves, and tonight, something else. A mustiness, a richness, like the earth itself was exhaling after the long heat of summer. There was a plane tree just outside her building, one of the thousands that lined the streets of Paris, and its leaves had begun to turn. Some had already fallen, gathering in little drifts along the sidewalk below, and when the evening breeze stirred them, their scent rose up to her window like an offering. She breathed it in deeply, letting it fill her lungs, letting it remind her of all the autumns that had come before and all the autumns that would come after. There was something both melancholy and hopeful about the changing seasons, she thought. A reminder that everything moves in cycles, that endings are also beginnings, that the bare branches of winter would eventually give way to the green buds of spring. Part 3. Soup. Clara wasn't particularly hungry, but she knew she should eat something. She had worked through lunch again, too absorbed in the manuscript to stop, and her body was beginning to remind her of its needs. She moved to the small kitchen and opened the refrigerator, considering her options. There, in a glass container, was the soup she had made yesterday. A simple thing, just vegetables and broth, but made with care. She had spent Sunday morning at the market on Rue des Blancs-Manteaux, wandering between the stalls, letting herself be drawn to whatever looked good. She had bought leeks with their green tops still bright and fresh, carrots with bits of earth still clinging to their skins, potatoes with thin, papery skins that would dissolve into the broth. A bunch of thyme, tied with string. A bay leaf from a woman who sold only herbs and smiled at Clara like they shared a secret. Making the soup had been a kind of meditation. She had washed each vegetable slowly, running her hands over the smooth curves of the potatoes, feeling the ribbed texture of the celery stalks. She had chopped everything into small pieces, taking her time, enjoying the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board. The apartment had filled with the smell of onions softening in butter, then the deeper fragrance of the vegetables beginning to simmer. She had added water and salt and the herbs, then let it cook for an hour while she read by the window, checking it occasionally, stirring it gently, tasting and adjusting. Now she poured some of the soup into a small pot and set it on the stove, turning the flame to low. While it warmed, she set her little table by the window, just a bowl, a spoon, a cloth napkin she had found at a flea market, embroidered with faded blue flowers. When the soup was warm, she ladled it into her bowl and sat down. The steam rose in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of thyme and bay leaf. She took her first spoonful and let the warmth spread through her. Outside, the sky had fully darkened now, and the windows across the courtyard glowed with soft light. She could see into some of them, a woman standing at her sink, a man sitting in an armchair reading, the blue flicker of a television in another. Each window was a small world, a small story, and she found comfort in being one of many, in being part of this vast tapestry of lives being lived simultaneously across the city. She ate slowly, savoring each spoonful, not rushing. The soup was exactly what she needed, simple and nourishing, tasting of earth and care. She thought about the hands that had grown these vegetables, the sun and rain that had fed them, the centuries of people who had made soup just like this, warming themselves against the autumn chill. When she finished, she washed her bowl and spoon and put them away, then wiped down the small counter, leaving her kitchen tidy. These small acts of order felt important to her, like putting a period at the end of a sentence. The day was complete. Now the evening could begin. Part 4. The Night Routine. Clara had developed her night routine slowly, over months, discovering what her body and mind needed to make the transition from waking to sleep. She thought of it as a kind of unwinding, a gradual loosening of the knots the day had tied. First, she drew a bath. Her bathroom was tiny, the tub short enough that she had to bend her knees to fit, but she loved it anyway. She ran the water hot and added a few drops of lavender oil that she kept in a small blue bottle on the shelf. The steam rose and filled the small space, softening the edges of everything, making the room feel like a cloud. She undressed slowly, folding her clothes and setting them aside, then lowered herself into the water inch by inch, letting her body adjust to the heat. The warmth seeped into her muscles, loosening the tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying, in her shoulders from hunching over manuscripts, in her neck from staring at screens, in her lower back from the wooden chair at her desk. She lay there for a long time, not doing anything, just breathing and floating. The water lapped gently against the sides of the tub when she moved, a soft, rhythmic sound like waves on a distant shore. She let her thoughts drift, not holding on to any of them, letting them come and go like clouds passing across a sky. When the water began to cool, she rose and wrapped herself in a thick towel, patting her skin dry gently. She applied lotion to her arms and legs, taking her time, smoothing it in slow circles. This too was part of the routine, this care for her body, this attention to her physical self, this reminder that she was worth tending to. She put on her softest pajamas, the ones that had been washed so many times they felt like clouds against her skin. She brushed her teeth carefully, watching herself in the small mirror, noticing the tiredness around her eyes but also a contentment there, a settledness. She combed her hair, working through the tangles gently, then braided it loosely so it wouldn't knot while she slept. She smoothed cream onto her face, pressing it into her cheeks with her fingertips, a gesture that always made her think of her grandmother, who had done the same thing every night for as long as Clara could remember. Each of these small acts was a signal to her body that the day was ending, that it was time to slow down, to rest. By the time she finished, she could already feel sleep beginning to gather at the edges of her consciousness, like soft shadows moving in from the corners of the room. Part 5. The Candle. Back in the main room, Clara crossed to her bedside table and picked up the box of matches. On the table sat a candle in a glass jar, a French brand, something she had treated herself to when she first arrived, a small luxury that had become essential to her evenings. The candle smelled of fig leaves and cedar, a combination that reminded her of late summer evenings and old libraries. When she lit it, the flame flickered for a moment, then steadied, casting a warm golden glow across the room. She switched off the lamp, leaving only the candlelight. The room transformed immediately, all harsh edges softened, all corners deepened into shadow. Her bed, with its white linens and the old quilt she had found at a brocante, looked impossibly inviting, like a harbor waiting for a weary ship. She pulled back the covers and climbed in, arranging the pillows behind her back, pulling the quilt up over her legs. The sheets were cool at first against her bare feet, but they warmed quickly, molding to her body, becoming an extension of her. The candlelight danced on the ceiling, making shadows that moved like slow, lazy creatures. She watched them for a while, letting her eyes lose focus, letting her mind drift into that liminal space between waking and sleeping. The scent of the candle wrapped around her like a blanket, earthy and sweet and warm. It mixed with the faint smell of autumn leaves still drifting in from the cracked window, creating something new, something that was neither wholly inside nor outside, but somewhere in between. She could feel the night deepening around her. The sounds from the street had quieted now, the rush hour long over, the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, once, twice, 9 times. 9 o'clock. Still early, really, but she was so tired, and the bed was so soft, and the candle was burning so gently. Part 6. The Book. Clara reached for the book on her nightstand. It was worn and well-loved, its spine cracked from many readings, its pages soft at the edges. It was by her favorite author, a woman who wrote about ordinary lives with extraordinary tenderness, finding meaning in the smallest moments, a cup of tea, a letter received, a walk taken in the rain. She opened it to where she had left off, marked by a postcard she had bought at the Musée de l'Orangerie, a detail from one of Monet's water lilies. The candlelight was just enough to read by, casting the words in a warm amber glow that made them feel like something precious, something to be savored. The chapter she began was about a woman walking through her garden at dusk, noticing the way the light changed as the sun set, the way the flowers closed their petals, the way the birds fell silent one by one. The writing was slow and patient, each sentence unfolding like a flower itself, inviting the reader to pause, to breathe, to really see what was being described. Clara felt the words wash over her, not rushing, not grasping, just letting them flow through her like water. She had read this book many times before, knew what would happen, knew every turn of phrase, and yet each reading revealed something new, some subtle shade of meaning she had missed before. This was one of the things she loved most about her favorite books, the way they deepened with each reading, the way they grew with her, changed as she changed, offered different gifts at different times in her life. A book she had first read at 20 meant something different now, at 28. The same words, but she was not the same person receiving them. She finished the first chapter and began the second. This one was about the woman's mother, who had taught her to garden, who had shown her which plants thrived in shade and which needed sun, who had explained the patience required to grow something from seed. The writing was suffused with love and loss, with the particular ache of remembering someone who is gone. Clara thought of her own mother, far away now, but always present in some corner of her heart. She thought of their Sunday phone calls, the way her mother always asked about the weather in Paris, as if concerned that her daughter might catch cold even from 1,000 miles away. She thought of the care package that had arrived last week, jars of jam from the trees in her childhood backyard, a pair of warm socks, a note that said simply, "So proud of you." She had pinned the note above her desk at work, next to the photograph of the Seine at twilight. Two talismans, both reminders of the same thing, that she was loved, that she belonged, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The second chapter ended, and she closed the book, marking her place with the postcard. 2 chapters was enough for tonight. Her eyes were growing heavy, the words beginning to blur, her body sinking deeper into the mattress with each breath. Part 7. The Stars. Clara set the book aside and looked toward the window. From her bed, she could see a rectangle of night sky, dark blue deepening to black, scattered with stars. This was something she had never expected to find in Paris, stars. She had assumed, before she arrived, that the city lights would wash them all away, would leave the sky empty and orange with light pollution. And it was true that she could not see as many as she had seen in the countryside as a child, lying on her back in the grass with her father, learning the names of constellations. But they were there. Fewer, fainter, but there. On clear nights like tonight, she could make out the brightest ones, the sharp blue of Vega, the yellow of Capella, the ancient light of Betelgeuse at Orion's shoulder. She couldn't see the whole of the Milky Way anymore, that great river of light that had seemed so vast when she was young, but she could imagine it there, hidden just behind the glow of the city, waiting. She thought about how old that light was. How some of those stars had already died, had already collapsed into themselves or exploded into supernovas, but their light was still traveling, still reaching her window, still delivering a message from millions of years ago. It made her own life seem both incredibly small and incredibly precious, one tiny moment in the vast sweep of cosmic time, and yet a moment that was hers, that mattered, that was real. She wondered if anyone else in Paris was looking at the stars right now. Surely someone was. Surely somewhere in this city of millions, another person was lying in their bed, gazing out their window, feeling that same sense of wonder and smallness and connection to something larger than themselves. The thought comforted her. She was alone in her apartment, but she was not alone in the world. She was one of billions, all of them looking up at the same sky, all of them making their way through the same universe, all of them trying to find meaning and beauty and connection in the brief time they were given. A cloud drifted across the window, blotting out the stars for a moment, then moved on, revealing them again. The night was in motion, even when it seemed still. Everything was always changing, always becoming something new. Part 8. Autumn Deepening. A gust of wind stirred the leaves in the plane tree outside, and the smell of autumn intensified, richer now, with a hint of decay beneath the sweetness. Clara didn't find it unpleasant. It was the smell of transformation, of things breaking down to become something else, of the cycle that kept the world alive. The air coming through the window had grown cooler in just the hour since she had come home. She could feel it on her face, a gentle chill that made her burrow deeper into her blankets, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The nights were getting longer and colder. Winter was coming. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight was still autumn, still held that particular quality of in-betweenness, of endings and beginnings intertwined. The leaves were still on the trees, some of them, at least, and the ground had not yet frozen. There was still time to walk in the parks and feel the crunch of leaves beneath her feet, still time to drink hot chocolate at the cafe on the corner, still time to watch the sunset turn the Seine to gold. She thought about the winter ahead, the gray days, the early darkness, the cold that would seep into her bones no matter how many layers she wore. She thought about Christmas lights strung across the boulevards, about ice skating at the Hotel de Ville, about cups of vin chaude warming her hands. There would be beauty in winter too, she knew. There always was. Each season brought its own gifts, its own invitations to pay attention, its own particular light. But for now, she was content with autumn. Content with this moment, this night, this window open just a crack, this candle burning down, this bed holding her softly, this city breathing around her like a living thing. Part 9. The City Quiets. From somewhere below, she heard the sound of voices, people leaving the restaurant on the corner, saying their goodbyes, making plans to meet again soon. There was laughter, warm and genuine, the kind that comes from a good meal shared with people you love. Then the sound of footsteps, moving off down the street, growing fainter and fainter until they disappeared entirely. She heard a car pass by on the road outside, the swish of tires on pavement, a brief flash of headlights across her ceiling, then gone. Another followed a minute later, and another after that, each one a small reminder of the lives being lived all around her, the people heading home after long days, the world carrying on with its business even as she lay here, suspended between waking and sleep. The sounds were not intrusive. They were, if anything, comforting, a kind of urban lullaby, the white noise of a city settling in for the night. She had grown used to them over the months she had lived here, had come to find peace in them rather than disturbance. They reminded her that she was part of something larger, that she was not alone, that the world would keep turning whether she was awake to witness it or not. Gradually, the sounds grew fewer and farther between. The restaurant must have closed. The last of the diners had gone home. The streets were emptying, the city quieting, the night deepening into its fullest darkness. She listened to the silence, which was not really silence at all but a kind of ambient murmur, the hum of the city at rest, the breathing of millions of people in their beds, the pulse of a place that was alive but sleeping. Somewhere far away, she could hear the wail of a siren, but it was so distant it sounded like something from a dream, something that belonged to another world entirely. Part 10. Drifting. The candle had burned low now, its flame flickering in a pool of melted wax. Clara watched it for a while, hypnotized by its gentle motion, the way it swayed and steadied, like a dancer moving to music only it could hear. Her eyelids were heavy. Each blink lasted a little longer than the last. Her body had become one with the mattress, sinking into it, supported by it, held as if by gentle hands. The quilt was warm around her, the perfect weight, enough to feel present without being heavy. She let her thoughts wander where they would. They moved without direction, touching on this and that, a conversation she'd had with a colleague, a sentence from the book she'd been reading, a memory from childhood that surfaced for no particular reason. None of it demanded her attention. None of it required her to act or decide or think. It was just the gentle churning of a mind preparing for sleep, sorting through the day's impressions, filing them away. She thought about tomorrow, briefly, the manuscript she needed to finish, the meeting in the afternoon, the friend she was supposed to call. But even these thoughts had a soft quality to them, like they were wrapped in cotton, unable to generate any real urgency. Tomorrow would come when it came. For now, there was only this moment, this breath, this slow descent into rest. The wind stirred the curtains again, and she caught another waft of that autumn smell, leaves and earth and something almost like smoke, perhaps from someone's chimney, someone somewhere preparing for winter in their own way. The candle guttered. The flame danced wildly for a moment, casting strange shapes on the walls, and then steadied again. It would not last much longer. But she would not be awake to see it go out. Already, sleep was reaching for her. Already her consciousness was loosening its grip on the waking world. Part 11. The Threshold. There is a moment, just before sleep takes us, when the world becomes soft and uncertain. The boundaries between thought and dream blur. Images arise that don't quite make sense, a face, a place, a feeling, and then dissolve before we can examine them. Clara was there now, in that liminal space. She was still aware of her body in the bed, still aware of the faint sounds of the city, still aware of the candle's glow behind her closed eyelids. But she was also somewhere else, drifting through a landscape that was neither memory nor imagination, neither real nor unreal. She saw her desk at the publishing house, but the papers on it were covered with flowers instead of words. She saw the bridge over the Seine, but the water beneath it was stars instead of water. She saw her mother's kitchen, but the window looked out onto Paris instead of the backyard she remembered. These images didn't alarm her. They didn't even surprise her. She accepted them with the easy logic of dreams, where anything is possible and nothing needs to be explained. She floated among them, a visitor in her own unconscious, watching without judgment. The smell of fig leaves from the candle became the smell of an actual fig tree in a garden she might have seen once or might have invented entirely. The sound of a car passing became the sound of waves on a shore she had never visited but somehow knew. The feeling of the blanket around her became the feeling of being held, of being safe, of being exactly where she belonged. Part 12. Sleep. And then, gently, without fanfare, Clara slipped from that threshold into sleep proper. Her breathing deepened and slowed. Her heart found its resting rhythm. Her body, which had carried her through another day in this city of light, finally released its last tension, becoming heavy and still and peaceful. The candle burned on for a few more minutes, then flickered and went out, leaving the room in darkness. But it was not an empty darkness. It was the darkness of rest, of renewal, of dreams beginning to form in the depths of her sleeping mind. Outside, the night continued. A few more cars passed by. A cat picked its way along the rooftops, its silhouette briefly visible against the stars. The wind carried more leaves from the plane tree, sending them drifting down to join their fallen companions on the sidewalk below. The temperature dropped another degree, and then another, as the earth turned slowly toward winter. In apartments all over Paris, other people were sleeping too. The woman across the courtyard had long since turned off her light. The man in the armchair had put down his book. The whole city lay wrapped in darkness, dreaming its millions of dreams, each one unique, each one secret, each one a world unto itself. And Clara dreamed. She dreamed of the publishing house, but it was also her childhood home, and her favorite author was there, reading from a book that had never been written. She dreamed of walking along the Seine, but the water was filled with stars, and she could reach down and touch them, scooping them up in her hands like cool, liquid light. She dreamed of autumn leaves falling, but they fell upward instead of down, rising into a sky that was endless and warm. In her dream, she was not tired. In her dream, she was not worried about manuscripts or meetings or phone calls. In her dream, she was simply present, simply here, simply alive in a world that was beautiful and strange and entirely her own. Part 13. The deepening night. The hours passed. The city slept on. At midnight, The church bells rang 12 times, but Clara didn't hear them. She was too far gone, too deep in the realm of sleep, where time moved differently and sound could not reach. At 1 o'clock, a light rain began to fall, soft and gentle, more mist than rain, barely enough to dampen the sidewalks. It tapped against Clara's window like tiny fingers asking to be let in, but her window was still cracked, and a few drops found their way inside, landing on the sill, forming small pools that reflected the distant streetlights. The rain brought a new smell, the smell of wet stone and clean air, washing away the dust that had accumulated during the dry autumn days. It mixed with the smell of leaves and created something fresh and alive, something that spoke of renewal even in the midst of dying. By 2 o'clock, the rain had stopped, and the clouds had parted, revealing the stars once more. They seemed brighter now, as if the rain had cleaned the sky as well as the streets. The plane tree dripped steadily, each drop catching the light as it fell, a tiny cascade of diamonds in the dark. Clara slept through all of it. Her dreams had shifted, as dreams do, becoming something new. She was in a garden now, perhaps the garden from the book she had been reading, or perhaps a garden from her own memory, or perhaps something entirely invented. There were flowers she didn't recognize and paths that led nowhere and a feeling of profound peace. She walked through this garden slowly, taking in each detail, feeling the soft earth beneath her bare feet. There was no rush. There was nowhere she needed to be. She could wander here forever, she thought, and be perfectly content. Part 14. Before Dawn. The darkest hour of the night arrived, that time between 3 and 4 in the morning when the world seems to hold its breath, when everything is suspended, waiting for the first hint of dawn. Clara's body moved through its cycles of sleep, dipping into deep rest and then rising again toward lighter stages, then sinking back down. Her eyes moved behind her closed lids, tracking the images of her dreams. Her hands, resting on the pillow beside her face, twitched occasionally, as if reaching for something only she could see. The candle had long since gone out, and the room was completely dark now except for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. The air had grown cold, and Clara, in her sleep, pulled the quilt higher, tucking it under her chin, curling her body into a ball to conserve warmth. Outside, the city was as quiet as it would ever be. The streets were empty. The restaurants were closed. Even the cats had found warm places to hide. Only the street lights remained awake, casting their orange glow on sidewalks that glistened faintly from the earlier rain. And then, slowly, the darkness began to lift. It was almost imperceptible at first, just a slight softening of the black, a hint of deep blue at the eastern edge of the sky. The stars began to fade, one by one, as the light grew. The rooftops began to emerge from the darkness, becoming shapes again, becoming real. Dawn was coming. Part 15. Morning approaches. In her bed, Clara stirred. She was not awake, not yet, but some part of her was beginning to sense the change. The light filtering through the curtains was different now, gentler, more diffuse. The air had that particular quality it gets just before sunrise, fresh and new and full of potential. She turned in her sleep, rolling onto her other side, burrowing deeper into the warmth of her blankets. Her dreams were fading now, dissolving like morning mist, leaving behind only impressions, a feeling of peace, a memory of beauty, a sense that something important had happened even though she couldn't quite remember what. The first birds began to sing, tentatively at first, just one or two voices, testing the air. Then more joined in, a chorus building, welcoming the new day. The sound drifted through Clara's open window and wove itself into her remaining dreams, becoming music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She would wake soon. The day would begin. There would be coffee to make and clothes to choose and a metro to catch. There would be manuscripts to read and colleagues to talk to and lunch to buy from the little cafe that made the best salads. There would be all the ordinary business of living, all the small moments that added up to a life. But not yet. Not quite yet. For now, she could stay here, suspended in this last fragment of night, held by her bed and her blankets and the four walls of her small apartment in Paris. For now, she could simply exist, without doing or thinking or being anything more than a body at rest, a mind at peace, a person who had found her place in the world and could finally, truly, completely relax. The light grew stronger. The birds sang louder. The city began to stir. And Clara slept on, content, dreaming, safe, exactly where she was meant to be. Epilogue: a new day waits. Outside, Paris was waking. The first cafes were opening their doors, the smell of fresh coffee and warm bread beginning to drift onto the streets. The metro trains were starting to run, carrying the first early risers to their jobs. The sun was climbing higher, painting the rooftops in shades of gold and rose. But in the small apartment on the 5th floor, Clara remained in her cocoon of warmth and darkness. The heavy curtains blocked most of the light, and the thick walls blocked most of the sound. She was in her own private world, her own sanctuary, her own small corner of the universe where nothing could reach her unless she wanted it to. Her alarm would go off soon. She would open her eyes and stretch and begin the slow process of re-entering the waking world. She would push back the covers and swing her feet onto the cold floor and make her way to the bathroom. She would splash water on her face and look at herself in the mirror and think about the day ahead. But all of that was still in the future, still waiting patiently on the other side of waking. For now, there was only this: a woman sleeping in a bed in Paris, dreaming dreams she would not remember, resting the deep rest that her body and mind so desperately needed. The candle on her nightstand was just a pool of cold wax now, but its scent lingered faintly in the air. The book lay where she had left it, waiting to be picked up again tonight. The window was still cracked, and a gentle breeze stirred the curtains, carrying in the scent of the plane tree and the first warm notes of morning. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was exactly as she had dreamed it would be all those years ago, when she had pinned that photograph above her desk and imagined herself walking the streets of Paris. She had made it. She was here. She was home. And as the sun rose over the rooftops and the day began without her, Clara slept on, peaceful and content, held by the city she loved, held by the life she had built, held by the deep and dreamless sleep of someone who has finally found their place. Rest now. The night is deep and quiet. Tomorrow will come when it comes, bringing its own light, its own gifts, its own moments to cherish. But for now, there is only this: the soft darkness, the warm blankets, the slow rhythm of your breathing, and the knowledge that you are exactly where you need to be. Sleep well.